They signed my farm away while I was birthing my daughter. Tell me if you've ever had to choose between keeping your family together and keeping yourself whole. Because that morning, April 23rd, I made the choice without knowing I'd made it. The contractions had started at dawn, slow, then relentless, and by the time my water broke across the kitchen linoleum, I was already texting my sister to grab the hospital bag from the mudroom. She arrived with my mother. They both wore that tight-lipped smile people reserve for funerals and labor wards. The delivery room was arctic. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while the monitor beeped my daughter's heartbeat into existence. My mother held my left hand. My sister held my right. I remember thinking, through the haze of epidural and exhaustion, that this was what family meant, showing up when your body splits open to let new life through. I pushed for 4 hours. When they finally laid her on my chest, skin to skin, I wept into her vernix sticky scalp and whispered promises I thought I could keep. My phone sat on the bedside table, screen dark. I didn't check it. Why would I? I was learning my daughter's face, counting her fingers, watching her breath fog the nursery bassinet. My sister brought me ice chips. My mother took photos. They cooed over her rosebud mouth, her translucent fingernails. Then they left. Something about paperwork, they said, and I drifted into the kind of sleep that feels like drowning in warm honey. I woke to a notification. My cousin Bryce's TikTok. The preview showed my front porch, the one I'd spent 3 summers rebuilding, plank by plank, after the flood took the original. In the video, 6 people I recognized from Thanksgiving held champagne flutes. My uncle was there. My aunt. Even my father, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. They were toasting. The caption read, "New chapter, new owner's home party popper." Ever had your hands go numb while holding something precious? I nearly dropped my daughter. I scrolled. The comments were worse than the video. People congratulating them. Asking for the realtor's contact. One said, "Finally getting that land in the family where it belongs." Another, "Your daughter didn't deserve it anyway, great move." My throat closed. The hospital room's antiseptic smell turned rancid. I called my sister 17 times. Voicemail. I called my mother. Voicemail. I called the county clerk's office with shaking fingers, and a voice that didn't sound like mine anymore. The deed transfer was dated April 23rd. Time-stamped 11:47 a.m. I'd been crowning at 11:47 a.m. A notary named Patricia Hollis had witnessed 3 signatures, my sister's, my mother's, and one labeled Power of Attorney Rachel Kim, POA holder. My sister. The same sister who'd held my hand while I screamed my daughter into the world, had held a pen while stealing my inheritance. Family is supposed to be the ones who show up. Mine showed up to the delivery room with a quitclaim deed and a plan. I sat in that hospital bed, my daughter asleep in the crook of my arm, and opened my laptop. I downloaded every text message, every email about the farm, every photo I'd ever posted of the rebuilt porch, the garden beds, the fence line I'd mended with my grandfather before he died. I screen recorded Bryce's TikTok. I pulled up the delivery room timestamp on my medical chart. I bookmarked the county clerk's digital filing. If they wanted war, I'd give them receipts, time-stamped, notarized, and admissible. Ever hoarded evidence just to stay sane? My daughter stirred. I kissed her forehead and smelled something I'd never noticed before. The faint metal tang of my own rage, mixed with milk and new skin. The nurse came in to check my vitals. Blood pressure elevated. Heart rate elevated. Elevated felt like an understatement. I was a live wire. I was a countdown. I was every ignored text message and every staged photograph, compressed into something that could finally detonate. I just needed the keys dipped in wax. The next heirloom quilt was already unraveling. They auctioned my legacy while I was miscarrying alone. Tell me if you've ever watched your inheritance become someone else's story. Because 3 weeks after I brought my daughter home, I was back in the hospital. Different floor, different emergency. The cramping started at 2 a.m. I didn't know I was pregnant again until I was losing it. My husband was deployed. My phone stayed silent through 6 missed calls to my mother, 4 to my sister. The ER nurse held my hand instead while I bled out 12 weeks of hope onto sterile paper. The ultrasound screen showed nothing where something should have been. The doctor's voice went soft and clinical. Incomplete miscarriage, she said, like those two words could contain the specific gravity of failure. They gave me medication to finish what my body had started. I spent 4 hours in a recovery bay with curtains instead of walls, listening to someone else's baby cry in the next partition. My grandmother's quilt, the one she'd stitched every winter of my childhood, the one with my initials hidden in the corner square, was folded at the foot of my empty bed at home. I thought about that quilt the whole drive back, how she'd let me sleep under it during thunderstorms, how the weight of it felt like being loved by someone who was gone. I pulled into my driveway at dawn. My phone lit up, a Facebook notification. My aunt had gone live 30 minutes prior. The preview thumbnail showed my living room. The quilt spread across my coffee table like a corpse at a wake. I sat in my car and watched the recording. 47 people had tuned in. My aunt stood behind the table in her church blazer, hands clasped, voice honeyed with performance. "This exquisite heirloom quilt," she announced, "hand-stitched by our beloved matriarch, will start bidding at $500. The camera panned across the stitching. I could see the faded blue thread where Grandma had embroidered my name. Could see the corner she'd patched after I'd torn it, climbing the backyard oak at 7. "Ever had your grief treated like inventory?" The comments scrolled like a feeding frenzy. "Gorgeous! What's the reserve? Can we see the underside?" Someone named Jennifer bid $600. Someone named Marcus countered with $750. My uncle appeared in the frame, grinning, holding up his phone. "We've got 1,000 from the back row." The live stream ended at $1,850. Sold to my cousin's mother-in-law, a woman I'd met twice at Christmas dinners, where she'd never learned my name. I called my aunt from the driveway. She answered on the 4th ring, breathless and triumphant. "Rachel, did you see? We raised almost $2,000 for the church fund." That was mine. Silence. Then carefully, "Honey, your grandmother left it to the family. We're all family, and you've been so distracted lately. We thought. I was hemorrhaging in the ER when you went live." More silence. I could hear her breathing change, recalibrating. "Well, I'm sorry you're going through that, but the quilt was never yours alone. It belongs to all of us. Your grandmother would have wanted it to do good in the world. Your inheritance stolen while you were losing a child, and they call your anger drama?" I hung up, walked inside. My daughter was asleep in her bassinet. The empty space on the linen chest where the quilt used to live looked like a wound. I opened my laptop and downloaded the Facebook live stream. Screen recorded every bid, every comment, every timestamp. I pulled up my grandmother's will, the original, the one I'd photographed at the county records office years ago, when I'd first suspected my family trafficked in erasure. The quilt was listed specifically, to my granddaughter Rachel Kim, the quilt bearing her name. I sent the video and the will to a lawyer that afternoon. Attached my hospital discharge papers, dated and time-stamped to the minute of the live stream. If they wanted to auction my legacy, I'd invoice them for theft, with interest, with penalties, with every public comment as evidence of willful conversion. Ever screen recorded your own grief? My daughter woke crying. I lifted her from the bassinet and held her against my chest, skin to skin again, this time with nothing soft between us. No quilt. No inheritance. Just the two of us, and a growing folder of evidence I was learning to weaponize. The UV light I'd ordered online sat in the cart, ready to check out. Grandma had always signed her work with invisible ink along the hemline. Every quilt had a label. Every label had a date. The next recipe book would either lock me out forever or blow the door off its hinges. They copyrighted my taste while I was in ICU. Tell me if you've ever had your childhood reduced to intellectual property. Because 2 months after the quilt disappeared, I woke up on a ventilator. Pneumonia had turned septic overnight. 1 minute I was coughing through a work call, the next I was intubated in intensive care with machines breathing for me. My brother visited once, took a photo of me unconscious, tubes snaking from my throat, and posted it to his Instagram story with a prayer hands caption. Then he left to finalize paperwork, he said. I didn't know what paperwork meant until I could breathe on my own again. The ICU was all beeping monitors and chemical light. Time moved like cold honey. I floated in and out of sedation, dreaming about my grandmother's kitchen. The recipe book she'd kept in the drawer by the stove, pages warped from decades of steam and sauce splatter. She'd taught me to cook from that book, shown me how to bloom spices in hot oil, how to taste for balance, how to adjust seasoning by instinct rather than measurement. Every margin held her notes in fading pencil. More garlic. Let rest 10 minutes. Your grandfather's favorite. I'd inherited that book when she died. Kept it on my own kitchen counter. Added my own notes in the margins beside hers. It was the only conversation we could still have. On day 6, my phone returned to me with my personal effects. 43 unread messages. I scrolled through the blur of well wishes until I hit the one from my brother. A link to his YouTube channel. The video title read, Introducing the Heritage Kitchen line. Recipes passed down through generations. Posted 4 days ago. Filmed in a test kitchen I didn't recognize. Ever had your inheritance treated like a product launch? I watched with the sound off, oxygen prongs digging into my nostrils. My brother stood in chef's whites, grinning at the camera, holding jars of sauce with labels that said Heritage Kitchen, in script that mimicked my grandmother's handwriting. He walked through each recipe. The green curry that was supposed to be mine. The fermented bean paste Grandma had taught me to make when I was 12. The chili oil I'd perfected over 15 years of failed batches and burned tongues. The comments were rapturous. Finally, authentic family recipes. Just ordered 6 jars. Your grandmother would be so proud. Someone asked if the recipes were really his family's. He responded, every single one. My grandmother's legacy, now available to everyone. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I pressed the call button, asked the nurse for my laptop. She hesitated. I was still too weak to sit up fully, but I must have looked unhinged enough that she complied. I opened the browser and searched, Heritage Kitchen Trademark. It pulled up a USPTO filing dated 8 days ago. Applicant, Marcus Chen. My brother. The filing included images of the recipe book pages. My grandmother's handwriting. My annotations in the margins. Your grandmother's marginalia stolen while you were intubated, and they call it a family business? I clicked through to his website. The sauce bottles were already for sale. $22 each, shipping additional. The About page featured a photo of my brother and my uncle standing in what used to be Grandma's kitchen, now renovated and unrecognizable. The text read, Heritage Kitchen was born from generations of culinary wisdom, carefully preserved and now shared with the world. Our family's recipes have fed us through hardship and celebration alike. No mention of me. No mention that I'd spent every Sunday for 3 years learning those recipes at Grandma's elbow, while my brother was busy with college parties and startup dreams. No mention that the marginalia they'd photographed included my handwriting, my corrections, my memories transcribed into measurements. I pulled up my own photos. Years of them. Me at 10, standing on a stool beside Grandma, stirring a pot. Me at 15, my first solo attempt at the curry, Grandma tasting and nodding approval. Me at 23, the day she'd signed the recipe book over to me in her trembling cursive. For Rachel, who has the tongue and the heart for this. Ever FOIA requested your own hospital records just to prove you were dying while they were trademarking your inheritance? I did. I requested every timestamp from my ICU admission. Downloaded every Instagram story my brother had posted. Screen recorded his YouTube video, his website, every social media comment where someone asked about his recipes and he claimed them without hesitation. I contacted a trademark attorney from my hospital bed, oxygen still supplementing every breath, and sent her a zip file labeled, Evidence of Fraud. The nurse came to check my vitals, blood pressure spiking again, heart rate elevated. She frowned at the laptop screen. You should be resting. I should have been cooking. I should have been the one in that test kitchen, holding jars that bore my labor and my grief. Instead, I was collecting timestamps and screenshots, building a case against my own blood, while my lungs remembered how to fill themselves. Whatever was hiding behind the kitchen drawer smelled like my name and gasoline. They married my trust fund while I was in postpartum psychosis. Tell me if you've ever lost time and found out what people did with it. Because 6 weeks after my daughter was born, I stopped sleeping. Not the normal new mother exhaustion, something darker, something that made the walls breathe and the ceiling press down like a hand over my mouth. I heard voices in the baby monitor when she was silent, saw shadows that moved wrong. My husband found me at 3 a.m. standing in the nursery, convinced someone was trying to take her. The next thing I remember clearly is fluorescent lights and a nurse asking me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10. I couldn't. Pain had become a language I'd forgotten how to speak. The psychiatric ward was all locked doors and safety checks every 15 minutes. They took my shoelaces, my belt, my phone. I spent 72 hours strapped to Clarity through medication that made my thoughts move like cold syrup. My mother visited on day 2. She sat across from me in the common room, hands folded in her lap, and told me not to worry. She'd handle everything. The baby was safe with her. The house was secure. I just needed to focus on getting well. I nodded. I thanked her. I didn't know yet what everything meant. They released me on a Thursday. My husband picked me up, quiet and careful, like I might shatter if he spoke too loud. We drove home in silence. My daughter was asleep in her car seat, perfect and unaware. The house looked the same. Smelled the same? But my mother had rearranged the living room. "Just trying to help," she said when I asked. The wedding veil, my grandmother's, the one I'd worn, the one with lace edging that took her 6 months to tat by hand, was missing from its archival box in the closet. Ever had your mind break and come back to find your history rewritten? I found it 3 days later, not in my house, on Pinterest. My mother's board, set to public, titled, "Our Big Day." 43 pins. Most were of a wedding I didn't recognize. Flowers in arrangements I'd never chosen. A venue I'd never seen. And there, in pin number 17, my veil. On someone else's head. The caption read, "Vintage family lace, finally being used the way it was meant to be." The woman wearing it was my cousin Jennifer. The wedding had happened while I was sedated and restrained. They'd married her off in my veil, in a ceremony I was never invited to, on a date I couldn't have attended even if I'd known. The photos were everywhere. Facebook. Instagram. My mother's carefully curated album with comments like, "So beautiful," and "That lace is stunning," and "Gorgeous family tradition." I called my mother. My hands were still shaking from the medication taper, but my voice came out steady, flat. "Where's my veil?" She didn't pretend not to know. "Jennifer needed it. You weren't using it. And honestly, Rachel, you weren't in any condition to..." It was mine. It's family. It was always meant to stay in the family. Jennifer is family. You were in the hospital. Someone had to make decisions. Your heirloom stolen while you were restrained in a psych ward, and they call it family tradition? I hung up, sat on the floor of my bedroom with my laptop, and started digging. The wedding had been planned for months. The venue deposit, paid from my savings account. My mother had power of attorney, medical and financial, signed the week after I gave birth, when I was too exhausted to read the paperwork carefully. She'd used it to access my accounts, to withdraw funds, to authorize transfers I never approved. I found the bank statements, the wire transfers, $4,700 to the venue, $1,800 to the caterer, $600 to the florist, all dated between my admission and discharge from the psychiatric ward, all signed off by my mother, acting on my behalf, funding a wedding I wasn't invited to with money I'd saved for my daughter's future. The veil itself, listed in the wedding contract as borrowed family heirloom, value $1,200, borrowed. As if I'd offered. As if I'd had any choice. Ever subpoenaed your own mom's browser history just to prove she planned your erasure? I did. I hired a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse and financial exploitation. Close enough to what this was. Requested her email records, her text messages, every digital footprint that showed premeditation. Found the group chat. My mother, my aunt, Jennifer, and 3 cousins I barely knew. Messages dating back 5 months. "Rachel's not stable enough to handle this. We should move the veil before she does something crazy. Better to ask forgiveness than permission. They'd planned it. Planned the wedding, the funding, the theft. Planned to use my breakdown as cover for stripping me of everything that proved I existed before I disappeared. I printed every message. Every bank statement. Every Pinterest pin. Built a timeline that showed exactly when each decision was made and exactly where I was when they made it. Restraints. Medication. Safety checks every 15 minutes. The version of me they kept in a drawer while they dressed someone else in my inheritance. My daughter started crying in the next room. I closed the laptop and went to her, lifted her from the crib and held her against my chest, her heartbeat syncing with mine. Somewhere out there, my cousin was posting honeymoon photos in a veil that smelled like my grandmother's attic, and my wedding day, and every moment I'd lost to a mind that betrayed me when I needed it most. Minute 19 blinked on the screen. Whatever happened next would be time-stamped forever. They went platinum off my lullaby while I was rehabbing my spine. The quiet before the upload felt like standing at the edge of a cliff I'd built myself. 3 months of physical therapy. 3 months of learning to walk again after the car accident that should have killed me but only broke me in half instead. My nephew had been driving. Texting. I'd woken up in traction with hardware holding my vertebrae together, and a settlement offer on the hospital tray table that my family insisted I sign. For everyone's peace of mind, they said. I signed because morphine makes you generous, and because I didn't know yet what they'd already taken. The song lived in a cracked notebook I'd kept under my mattress since I was 15. Notes scribbled during high school math class. Lyrics written in the margins of chemistry homework. A melody I'd hummed myself to sleep with for years before I had the courage to record it on a cassette in my bedroom closet. One take. Raw. My voice cracking on the high notes. I'd mailed that cassette to myself. Poor man's copyright. My music teacher had called it, and kept it sealed in its envelope in a shoebox under my bed. While I was relearning how to stand without a walker, my nephew uploaded that song to Spotify. I found it on a Tuesday. Physical therapy had left me sweating and nauseous. I scrolled through my phone during the ride home and saw the notification. Someone had tagged me in a post. Is this your family? The link led to a music blog reviewing new indie releases. There it was. My melody. My lyrics. My 15-year-old voice, cleaned up and remixed, credited to The Heritage Collective. My nephew's face in the artist photo. 600,000 streams in 2 weeks. Ever had your childhood turned into someone else's breakthrough moment? I sat in the passenger seat of my husband's car and played it through my phone speaker. The opening notes hit like a fist to the sternum. They'd kept my voice but layered it under production that made it sound intentional instead of desperate. Added harmonies I'd never sung, instruments I'd never played. The comments on Spotify were glowing. Ethereal. Haunting. Who is this artist? My nephew responded to every compliment. Thanked everyone. Did interviews on indie podcasts about his creative process and his musical heritage. I muttered the words, family forensics, under my breath. Let the internet do the rest. My hands found my phone with the kind of clarity that only comes after months of having nothing to do but think. I pulled up the photo of the sealed envelope. The postmark dated 15 years ago. My name and address in my teenage handwriting. I pulled up the cassette tape itself, still in its original case, ribbon slightly warped but intact. I took a video. 45 seconds. Me holding the envelope to the camera. Me breaking the seal. You could hear the paper tear. Me pulling out the cassette. Me pressing play on an old tape deck. The hiss and warble before my raw, unpolished voice came through. Keep your cursor on minute 24. Once you hear the static crack, you'll know which version was real and which was theft set to auto-tune. I uploaded it to TikTok first, Instagram second, Twitter third. The caption was simple. 15 years sealed, never opened, mailed to myself in 2010. You decide who wrote it. I tagged my nephew, tagged the music blog, tagged every playlist that had featured The Heritage Collective. I hit post and watched the view count climb like a fever breaking. The messages started within minutes. Wait, is this the original? Did he steal this? Someone check the postmark. The vocals match. My nephew's fans became investigators. They pulled up his interview quotes, compared them to my timeline, found inconsistencies. He'd claimed he wrote it in 2023. The postmark said 2010. He'd claimed the vocals were his sister. I had no sister. Just a nephew who'd been 12 when I'd recorded that song in my closet, teaching myself guitar chords from YouTube tutorials. Your pencil smudges on sheet music, stolen and streamed 600,000 times while you learn to walk again, and they call you bitter? My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Comments, shares, stitches, duets. Someone found the Spotify metadata, found the remix studio, found the producer who'd worked on it, found the money trail. 6 figures in projected royalties, all flowing to an LLC my nephew had registered 3 weeks after my accident. While I was learning to shower sitting down, he was registering a business built on my spine. The temperature in the car shifted. My husband glanced over, cautious. You okay? I wasn't. I was the opposite of okay. I was the reckoning 15 years in the making. I was every sealed envelope and every morphine-signed settlement. I was the static crack before the song kicked in. The proof that couldn't be remixed or disputed or explained away with creative process interviews. I pressed record, one tap, and my nephew's reputation could start tumbling. They patented my rose while I was in court-ordered therapy. The notification came through while I was sitting in a circle of strangers, talking about boundaries. My therapist had mandated group sessions after the song incident went viral. My family claimed I was having a breakdown, that the accident had damaged more than my spine, that I needed help processing my trauma in healthy ways instead of airing family business online. The judge agreed. 12 weeks of court-ordered therapy, or lose custody of my daughter. I chose the sessions. The greenhouse I'd built by hand sat empty behind my house. 10 years of work, grafting roses, crossbreeding for color and scent. I developed a hybrid no one had seen before. Petals that shifted from amber to crimson depending on the light, fragrance like honey and smoke. I'd named it after my daughter. Photographed every stage of its growth. Posted progress updates to a private gardening forum where people traded techniques and celebrated each other's victories. My uncle had been part of that forum. I'd invited him myself years ago when we still spoke without lawyers present. The notification was from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. A new plant patent filed and approved. Rosa hybrid designation 47AK, commonly known as Ember Dawn. My rose. My name for it. My decade of failed grafts and soil amendments and winter protection. Listed inventor, Richard Chen. My uncle. The application included photos from my private forum posts. Detailed growing instructions I'd shared. Even the cross-breeding lineage I'd documented in spreadsheets I'd never made public. Ever had your decade of dirt under your fingernails turned into someone else's patent? I sat in that therapy circle with my phone in my lap, screen glowing with bureaucratic theft. The facilitator was talking about anger management, about how we can't control others, only our reactions, about choosing peace over being right. I nodded in the right places, made eye contact, wrote in my journal when prompted. The whole time my mind was in the greenhouse, calculating what I'd need to prove prior art. Dated photos. Forum timestamps. The gloves I'd worn, still coated in pollen from that specific cultivar. When the session ended, I drove home and went straight to the greenhouse. The original plant was still there, thriving in the corner bed. I photographed it from every angle. Close-ups of the petal structure. The distinctive thorn pattern. The root system I'd documented when I'd first grafted it 5 years ago. I pulled up my forum account. Downloaded every post. Every comment, every photo I'd shared with timestamps that predated my uncle's patent by years. You're grafting scars on your hands while his name goes on the nursery catalog, and they say you're obsessed? His catalog had already gone to print. I found it online. 4 pages dedicated to Ember Dawn. Professional photos shot in a studio I didn't recognize. Descriptions that parroted my own words from the forum. Slightly reworded, but unmistakably mine. A breakthrough in rose cultivation, combining old-world fragrance with modern vigor. Exclusive to Heritage Gardens. $25 per cutting. $50 for a rooted plant. Projected sales in the thousands. I took a video, me standing in my greenhouse next to the mother plant, me showing the original graft scar, me pulling up the forum posts on my phone, scrolling through 5 years of documentation, me reading the patent application out loud, line by line, pointing out every detail that came directly from my own research. I kept my voice steady. Clinical. Let the facts detonate themselves. I posted it everywhere, tagged the USPTO, tagged every gardening publication that had covered my uncle's new line, tagged the nursery selling cuttings, included a PDF of my forum history, my photos, my notes. Titled it, Prior Art, How a Patent Got Approved Using Stolen Documentation. The gardening community is smaller than you'd think, and they take intellectual property seriously. Within hours, the comments section filled with botanists and hybridizers, comparing my timeline to his application, pointing out inconsistencies, noting that his patent photos showed a plant at a maturity level that would have taken years to achieve, years he claimed to have been working on it, years that overlapped exactly with my documented progress. Ever GPS tagged your own petals just to prove they bloomed in your soil first? I hadn't. But I'd done something better. I'd kept the original grafting journal, dated entries in waterproof ink, soil test results from the exact bed where the mother plant grew. Even a time-stamped video from 3 years ago of me explaining the crossbreeding process to my daughter, the plant visible in the background, already showing its distinctive coloring. My uncle's attorney sent a cease and desist. I sent back a counter notice with 40 pages of evidence. The nursery pulled his catalog from their website pending investigation. The patent office opened a review. My family group chat, the one I'd been removed from months ago, suddenly re-added me. 17 missed messages. All variations of, "Can we talk?" and "This has gone too far," and "Think about what you're doing to the family." Their group chat went quiet. My cursor pulsed like a heartbeat ready to detonate. They auctioned my moonshine recipe while I was detoxing in county. The courtroom smelled like floor wax and old panic. I'd been called as a witness in my own case. Civil suit for intellectual property theft, conversion of trade secrets, and about 6 other claims my lawyer had stacked like kindling. My sister sat at the defendant's table in a blazer that cost more than my monthly rent. Her attorney kept shuffling papers, not meeting anyone's eyes. The gallery was packed. Family on one side. Strangers who'd followed the case online on the other. A journalist from the local paper. Someone filming on a phone they thought they'd hidden in their lap. 50 pairs of eyes darted between me and my sister as I walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in. My hand shook on the Bible, not from nerves, from withdrawal. 3 months sober, after 2 years of drinking myself numb, with the same moonshine recipe my grandfather had taught me in his barn when I was 16. The recipe my sister had licensed to a distillery while I was detoxing in county lockup after a DUI that should have killed me but only destroyed my license and what was left of my dignity. My lawyer stood, asked me to state my name for the record, asked me to explain my relationship to the defendant. I kept my answers short, mechanical. Yes, she's my sister. Yes, we grew up together. Yes, our grandfather taught us both how to make corn whiskey in the barn behind his house. No, he didn't teach her the recipe. He died when she was 12. I was 16. Old enough to remember. Old enough to write it down. Ever had your inheritance treated like a family legend anyone could claim? The lawyer asked me to identify Exhibit A, a photograph of charred barrel staves. My initials carved into the wood. My grandfather had taught me to mark my barrels. "So you know which batch is yours when it's time to bottle," he'd said. These barrels had lived in my shed for 15 years. Aging whiskey I made twice a year, small batches never sold, just for myself and the few friends who knew what good moonshine tasted like. My sister's attorney objected. Hearsay. The judge overruled. The barrels spoke for themselves. My lawyer asked me to identify Exhibit B, a copy of my sister's TTB application, the federal permit you need to legally distill spirits. Filed 8 months ago. Approved 6 months ago. Recipe attached. Every measurement, every temperature, every aging instruction my grandfather had taught me in that barn, while my sister was at sleepover parties and school dances. The temperature in the room shifted. Someone in the gallery coughed. My sister stared at the table. Her attorney whispered something urgent. My lawyer asked me where I was when that application was filed. County lockup, detoxing, vomiting withdrawal into a steel toilet while my cellmate told me it gets better. It didn't. Not for 6 weeks. Not until I was released and found out my sister had taken the recipe I'd been drowning in and turned it into a business partnership with Heritage Distilling Company. Projected revenue, $250,000 in year 1. Your copper still, your grandfather's voice, your charred barrel staves, stolen while you were shaking in a cell, and they call it entrepreneurship? My lawyer handed me Exhibit C, a flash drive, asked me to explain what was on it. I kept my voice flat. Recordings, 30 hours of them. My grandfather teaching me the recipe, me at 16, asking questions, him correcting my technique, his voice, unmistakable, explaining the mash bill, the cuts, the proof, all time-stamped, all dated years before my sister claimed she'd learned it from him, years before he died. The judge asked to hear a sample. My lawyer queued it up. My grandfather's voice filled the courtroom through tinny speakers. Now, Rachel, you gotta watch the temperature here. Too hot and you burn the sugars. Too cool and it won't convert. This is the part where most folks mess up. 50 people heard him say my name, not hers, mine. My sister's mask cracked like cheap porcelain. Finally, the truth leaked out in the form of her attorney requesting a recess. The judge denied it, asked me to continue. I pulled out Exhibit D, my arrest record, dated 8 months ago. The same week my sister filed her TTB application. The same week I was booked into county. The same week she'd visited me once, briefly, to tell me she'd handle things while I got clean. Ever filed a Freedom of Information request on your own arrest just to prove they timed your destruction? I had. The visiting logs showed she'd come twice more than I remembered. Both times bringing paperwork she claimed was for my bail. Paperwork I was too sick to read. Paperwork that included a notarized statement giving her permission to use family recipes for commercial purposes. My signature at the bottom. Her handwriting on the witness line. The room inhaled as one. My lawyer projected the signature on the courtroom screen, asked me if I remembered signing it. I said no. Said I remembered signing something about bail, about getting out, about trusting her to help me when I couldn't help myself. My sister finally looked up. Her eyes met mine across the courtroom. For the first time, I wasn't the accused. I was the witness. She was the one sweating under the lights. She was the one whose attorney was frantically typing notes. She was the one whose name would be attached to fraud, to forgery, to exploiting an addict in withdrawal for profit. The room inhaled as one. My flash drive blinked like a heartbeat in the dock. They trademarked my geometry while I was grieving my mare. The judge took 3 days to deliberate. 3 days of checking my phone every 15 minutes. 3 days of my family's lawyers sending settlement offers that climbed higher each time I declined. 3 days of living in the space between vindication and doubt, where you start to wonder if fighting was worth the cost of never speaking to your blood again. The ruling came through on a Friday. Email notification at 9:47 a.m. I was in the pasture when my phone buzzed, standing where I'd buried my mare 4 months ago. The ground was still soft. Grass hadn't fully grown back yet. I'd been out there every morning since, talking to the dirt like she could still hear me. She'd been 23. I'd raised her from a foal. The colic came fast and brutal. The vet said there was nothing anyone could have done. I didn't believe her then. Still didn't. I opened an email with hands that smelled like hay and grief. The subject line said, Final Judgment, Chen versus Chen. I skimmed the legal language until I hit the part that mattered. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. Defendant is hereby ordered to cease all commercial use of the disputed intellectual property and remit all proceeds earned to date. Ever won everything and felt nothing but cold? I stood in the pasture and stared at the screen. My sister owed me $247,000. The distillery license was void. The patent on my rose was under review for revocation. My nephew's song had been pulled from streaming platforms. My mother's power of attorney was revoked. My uncle's nursery catalog was being recalled. Every piece of evidence I'd collected, every timestamp I'd documented, every night I'd spent building a case instead of sleeping, had paid off in a way that felt more like amputation than victory. My phone rang. My lawyer, congratulating me, asking about next steps. I told her I'd call back and hung up. Walked to the barn. The quilt square I'd painted on the silo was still there. Geometric pattern in barn red and cream. I'd designed it the summer after I'd bought the property. Spent 3 weekends on a ladder in the heat, brush in hand, creating something that was mine in a way nothing else had been. A visible claim. A marker that said this place belonged to someone who cared enough to paint it. My brother-in-law had photographed it, turned the design into prints he sold on Etsy. Rustic farmhouse charm, the listing said. Original artwork inspired by traditional barn quilts. $47 per print. Hundreds sold before I'd found out. Before I'd added it to the lawsuit. Before the judge ordered him to turn over his sales records and every cent he'd made. Your chalk lines on weathered wood. Your ladder bruises. Your summer sweat. Stolen while you were burying your best friend in the pasture, and they framed it as folk art? The barn was quiet. My mare's stall was still empty. I hadn't been able to clean it out yet. Her halter hung on the hook by the door. I touched it. Let myself feel the leather worn soft by years of her pulling against it, impatient for the pasture. Let myself remember the weight of her head over my shoulder, the way she'd nuzzle my pockets for treats, the sound of her hooves on the barn floor. The judgment was final, binding, enforceable. I'd won. But winning meant my family would never speak to me again without lawyers present. Meant every holiday would be spent alone, or with people who weren't related by blood. Meant my daughter would grow up, knowing her mother chose being right over being welcomed. Ever geotagged your own grief just to prove someone stole the moment you were drowning? I had. I documented everything. The day my mare died. The day I painted the quilt square. The day I found my brother-in-law's Etsy shop. The day I added it to the lawsuit. Every piece of evidence, another shovel of dirt between me and the people who were supposed to show up to funerals and ask if you were okay. My phone buzzed again. The family group chat. I'd been re-added for the 3rd time. 17 new messages. I didn't open them. Didn't need to. I knew what they'd say. Some version of, "Are you happy now?" and "Was it worth it?" and "You've destroyed this family." I looked up at the silo, at the quilt square I'd painted with my own hands. At the geometric proof that I'd been here first, that I'd built something, that I'd made a mark. The paint was fading. Would need to be redone soon. I wondered if I'd bother. If there was a point to maintaining symbols of ownership when everyone who was supposed to see them had already decided you were the villain. The wind picked up, carried the smell of cut hay and dirt that hadn't settled. My mare's grave looked small from this distance, like something you could step over without noticing if you weren't looking for it. I turned back to the barn. To the halter that would never be used again. To the stall that would stay empty because replacing her felt like admitting she'd been replaceable. The judgment was in my pocket. The settlement money would hit my account within 30 days. I'd won every battle, proven every theft, reclaimed every piece they'd taken. Judgment paused. Anxiety now lived in their veins, not mine. They optioned my storms while I was rehabbing my knee on the jetty. The book deal came 6 weeks after the judgment. A literary agent found me through the court transcripts that had gone semi-viral on legal Twitter. She called while I was doing physical therapy exercises on the rocks. My knee was still rebuilding strength after the surgery that should have been routine, but turned complicated when infection set in. The jetty had become my recovery space. Salt air, and the rhythm of waves, and the kind of solitude where you can scream and no one hears over the wind. The agent's pitch was simple: tell your story. The whole story. Every theft, every betrayal, every piece of evidence. She had publishers interested. Multiple houses. 6-figure advance. Bestseller potential. Your family has already made this public, she said. You might as well be the one who controls the narrative. I told her I'd think about it, hung up, stared at the lighthouse that had been my grandfather's. The one I'd inherited. The one where I'd kept a logbook of every storm that passed through, every ship I'd guided, every night I'd spent awake watching the beams sweep across black water. My cousin had found that logbook after I was airlifted off these same rocks 3 months ago. Knee shattered from a fall I barely remembered. Hypothermia setting in. The Coast Guard said I was lucky. My cousin said the stories in that logbook would make a great memoir. Then she optioned them to a producer before I'd even left the hospital. Ever had your near-death experience turned into someone else's Netflix pitch? I'd seen the pitch deck. 53 slides. My words from the logbook quoted throughout. A visceral tale of survival, family legacy, and the storms we weather alone. Character sketches based on real people. My grandfather. My daughter. Me. Except in their version, I was the supporting character. My cousin was the protagonist, the keeper of family history, the one who'd preserved these stories for the world. The logbook sat in my bag. I'd gotten it back through the lawsuit. Every page salt-stained and ink-smudged. My handwriting documenting 15 years of lighthouse keeping. Coordinates of ships in distress. Weather patterns. Thoughts I'd written at 3 a.m., when the beam was the only light for miles. Private thoughts. Grief thoughts. The kind of raw internal monologue you only write when you think no one will ever read it. My cousin had scanned every page, given copies to the producer, signed away adaptation rights to my words, my storms, my isolation, for a development deal that paid her $75,000 up front. Your inked coordinates, your 3 a.m. confessions, your survival scrawled in margins, stolen while you were hypothermic on the rocks, and they call it preserving family legacy? The agent called back 3 days later. I'd decided. Not the memoir she wanted, something different. I wanted to publish the logbook, exactly as written. No narrative framing, no explanation, just the raw entries, date-stamped, weather-logged, unfiltered. Let people read what my cousin had tried to adapt. Let them see the original versus the pitch deck she'd sold. The agent was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's not a book, that's evidence. Exactly. She said she'd make calls, said there might be a small press interested, said it wouldn't be a bestseller but it would be something else, something true. I told her that was enough. Truth was all I had left that they hadn't tried to trademark. I spent the next month preparing the manuscript, scanning every page at 600 dpi, preserving the salt stains, the smudged ink, the places where my pen had pressed too hard and torn through the paper. Every imperfection was proof of authenticity. Every weathered edge was a timestamp they couldn't dispute. The day before it went to the printer, my cousin's lawyer sent a cease and desist. Claimed I was interfering with her contracted adaptation rights. Claimed the logbook entries were collaborative family history. Claimed publishing them would damage her relationship with the producer. Ever copyright registered your own handwriting just to prove your thoughts were yours first? I had, 2 years ago, long before the lawsuit. Back when I'd first suspected my family collected my words the way some people collect receipts. I'd registered the entire logbook with the Copyright Office. Every entry. Every margin note. Time-stamped and notarized and filed away for exactly this moment. I sent my cousin's lawyer a copy of the registration. Attached a screenshot of her pitch deck using my words without attribution. Added the Netflix producer's contact information and a note suggesting they might want to reconsider their partnership with someone who was actively being sued for intellectual property theft in multiple jurisdictions. The cease and desist was withdrawn within 24 hours. The book released on a Tuesday. Small print run, 300 copies, no marketing budget. Just the Lighthouse logbook, published exactly as I'd written it. The cover was simple. A photo of the lighthouse at night. Beam cutting through fog. Title in plain serif font, Storm Log, 2008 to 2023. My cousin's Netflix deal fell through the following week. The producer cited, quote, complications with source material rights. Her lawyer sent one more letter, asking if we could settle. Asking if I'd consider allowing some limited use of the logbook entries for a reduced fee. Asking if there was any way to make this right. I didn't respond. Let the silence speak for itself. Let them sit with the uncertainty the way I'd sat with it for years. Wondering what they'd take next. Wondering what I'd wake up to find had been signed away in my name. The logbook sat on my desk. First edition. Author copy. My name on the spine. My words inside. Unedited. Unfiltered. Mine. Tomorrow, the world would hear every page rustle. Tonight, I held the only copy. They Instagrammed my embers while I was sedated in lockdown. I stood in my childhood bedroom where they once told me I was too unstable to be trusted with my own journals. This time, I held the USB drive fired in porcelain. The room hadn't changed since I'd been taken out of it 6 months ago. Same lavender walls. Same window overlooking the driveway where the ambulance had parked. Lights spinning red and blue across the ceiling, while paramedics asked me questions I couldn't answer through the fog of panic that had swallowed me whole. 5150, danger to myself, 72-hour hold that turned into 14 days. They'd sedated me on day 3 when I wouldn't stop screaming about the journals. 20 years of them. Stacked in milk crates under my bed. Everything I'd ever written. Every thought I'd been too afraid to say out loud. Every secret I'd trusted to paper instead of people. My daughter had filmed them burning it all. The video was still up. 200,000 views. My daughter, 17. Dancing around the bonfire in our backyard. My mother and sister feeding pages into the flames. My journals curling black, edges glowing orange. The caption, cleansing ritual, letting go of toxic energy. Comments full of praise. So healing. Proud of you for protecting your peace. Sometimes you have to burn the past to move forward. The USB drive felt warm in my palm, porcelain smooth. Inside, scanned copies of every journal, every page. I digitized them 2 years ago when I'd first felt the walls closing in. When I'd first suspected my family was building a case to declare me incompetent. I'd spent 3 months scanning in secret, 500 hours of my life preserved at 600 dpi, time-stamped, backed up, encrypted. The bonfire had burned paper, ash and smoke and performative healing for the algorithm. But the words were still mine. I clicked the drive into my laptop, waited for the folder to load. 50 gigabytes. 20 years. The screen filled with thumbnails, my handwriting at 16. At 23. At 31. Every version of myself I'd been, before the panic took over. Before the lockdown. Before they decided burning my history was an act of love. The timestamp on the bonfire video read April 7th, 9:47 p.m. The timestamp on my admission paperwork read April 7th, 3:22 p.m. They'd waited 6 hours. 6 hours after I'd been strapped to a gurney and sedated. 6 hours to make sure I couldn't stop them. I opened the editing software, pulled the bonfire video from Instagram, placed it side by side with my admission records. Medical notes that said, patient experiencing acute psychotic break, and quote, gravely disabled, and requires immediate psychiatric intervention. Next to my daughter's smiling face. Next to the flames consuming 20 years of my handwriting. Next to comments congratulating them for boundary setting and self-care. The proof assembled itself. Their timeline. My timeline. The 6-hour gap where they'd made a choice about my past while I was chemically restrained and legally powerless to stop them. I pressed export. The file rendered. 12 minutes of evidence. I titled it, What They Burned While I Was Sedated, and What Survived. Uploaded it everywhere. Tagged every account that had commented on the original bonfire video. Tagged the crisis center that had held me. Tagged the lawyer who'd helped me get my medical records unsealed. My phone started buzzing before the progress bar hit 100%. The comments came faster than I could read them. People who'd praised the cleansing ritual now asking questions. Wait, she was in the hospital? They burned her journals without permission? Is this legal? Someone linked to the Baker Act laws. Someone else pointed out that destroying someone's personal property while they're involuntarily committed could constitute abuse. A true crime podcaster asked if she could cover the story. My mother called, I didn't answer. My sister texted, I archived it. My daughter sent a voice memo. I let it sit unplayed. For the first time, I wasn't the storm. I was the forecast. I was the cold front moving in, with data they couldn't dispute, and timestamps they couldn't explain away. The restoration came quietly. No fanfare. Just a notification from my bank. Settlement deposit. My mother's attorney had negotiated $50,000 for the journals, for the invasion of privacy, for the destruction of personal property during a mental health crisis. Not enough to replace 20 years of memory, but enough to prove they knew what they'd done was wrong. Ever watched the person who erased you realize they're the one being wiped? The bonfire video was still up, but the comments had turned. My daughter's follower count was dropping. My mother's Facebook page was flooded with questions she wasn't answering. My sister had made her accounts private. The narrative they'd built, troubled daughter, necessary intervention, healing family, cracked like dried clay under the weight of timestamps and medical records, and 12 minutes of evidence they couldn't spin. I saved the porcelain drive to my desk drawer, next to my grandmother's recipe book, next to the deed to my farm, next to the quilt label I'd found under UV light. Every piece of proof that I'd existed before they tried to make me disappear. The bedroom window showed the backyard. The fire pit was still there. Blackened stones in a circle. Grass growing back around the edges. I could see it from here. The place where they'd danced while I drowned in sedation. The place where they'd thought burning evidence would make it gone. But smoke doesn't erase. It just changes form, rises, spreads, lands somewhere else, and leaves a mark.